What's up, guys? How's it going today? Awesome. So, moving on with habit 2, principles of personal leadership, or beginning with end in mind. Kind of the same thing. But, so I've been thinking a lot about this idea of the fact that all things are created twice. So we talked a little bit about this last episode, and we're going to dive further into it in today's episode in the section by design or by default, right? So really powerful principle here. I'm really excited to go over this. So my story from the previous episode about all things are created twice. So I had committed to you guys that I would revamp my first creation of the podcast to look over my objectives and then what I can do to actually implement and achieve those objectives. So right before I shot this episode, I put together a first creation, a more in-depth first creation of the podcast. Is it perfect? No, I could still use a lot of work, but it does get me a lot more excited to be on this and to express my ideas, because now I have a more general idea of what I'm going to share about, the stories I want to share, and actually things that I want to learn. Because like I said in the beginning, the purpose of this podcast is, well, I guess the main purpose, there are some others, but the main purpose is for me to better understand these 7 habits by teaching them, or the principles contained in this book, because they've been very, very powerful for me. And I believe they are essential to being just effective in one's life. So that's what we're going for today. So moving right into it, it was just really, really exciting for me to do this podcast, to first create it. And I realized that first creating is a lot of fun. It is a ton of fun. As human beings, we want to build things and to create things. That's our passion. We get motivated by it, and we take pride in our work, right? It's in our nature. And so it feels really cool for us to create something first mentally, and then to actually execute on that first creation, which we'll get in that later. And I'm really excited for that, because I actually do have some weaknesses there, but I love first creating, because it's just so much fun to think about the what if scenarios, to live out of your imagination. I freaking love it so much, because it just brings in a lot of passion and emotion into what you're doing. And then you all of a sudden are like, oh, I'm not just doing this task to do it because I quote unquote have to. It's no, I want to, and I choose to because of these things, because of these objectives that I want to accomplish. So I came up with 4 objectives for this podcast, and how I want to get better at just becoming the best version of myself, and how this podcast is leading to that, right? So pretty cool stuff there. So going into this section about by design or default, right? So essentially it's this whole idea of the fact that we have understood that this principle that all things are created twice. They are. Now, sometimes we don't necessarily sit down and open up Word and then write out everything we're going to do in a day. Sometimes it's more just spontaneous things, or someone will invite us to something, we kind of just agree and go along with the flow. Or sometimes we sleep in, or we don't get all of our homework done that we're supposed to, right? And so everything is created twice, but not all first creations are by conscious design. So that's what he means by default. Either we can proactively design our lives, or we can kind of just let it be by default. Whatever kind of happens, whatever flows, right? And there are 2 different ways of living life. However, there is a major repercussion with living a life by default, and we're going to dive into that. And so if we don't develop our own self-awareness, right? Like, we have to be aware of this principle and aware that we are in control of our lives. That's like all of habit one is self-awareness. Just like understanding and realizing that we are in control, that we are the programmers of our life. And if you don't if you aren't self-aware of that, then you're never going anywhere. Essentially, you're just going to be like buffeted by the winds of other people and their agendas and intentions and motives and plans, right? And so if you don't have a first creation by design, you will live out the first creations of other people. You just will. And so, like, that's just how it works. So it says there, if we do not develop our own self-awareness, nor take responsibility for our first creations, we essentially empower other people and other like circumstances outside of our circle of influence to shape much of our lives by default. So that's exactly what I was just saying. Sorry, I was just reading that from the book. That first we have to have this self-awareness and then take responsibility for our first creations, to recognize, understand, and accept that our lives are a function of our ability to take responsibility for our lives. Like, our lives and our circumstances and our situations, our talents and capabilities, the reason that they are the way they are is because of the choices that we have made in the past. And so we are the creator. Now, did you consciously choose this life? Maybe, maybe not. I would hope so. But it takes time to be able to develop this capacity, this self-awareness, this ability to take responsibility for our lives and to truly sit down and understand how to first create and how to create something by proactive design, right? How to create that blueprint. So if we don't do that, then we reactively live out the scripts handed to us, which could be from like church leaders or like family, childhood friends. Like, for example, I've got a buddy who his whole family loved BYU football, whereas my whole family loved Utah. Like, still to this day, my whole family is huge Utah fans, but I'm a big BYU fan because of my best friend who kind of instilled that belief, that script into me. And so I don't really care for football. Like, I don't really care to dive into it or to understand like the plays of it or the footballs. And so because I haven't consciously chosen to look at the stats or the people or like why I should like one team over the other, I've just kind of defaulted to my best friend's script because he just talked about it a lot, and so therefore I just kind of fell in line with it. And so that's an example of living out a belief or a life by default. And that's like not super important to me, so I don't really like care to dive into that. Like that's for me, that's like fine that I live that out by default. But there are other things that are really, really important that I live out by design, such as like my personal relationships or my family life, my family culture, even like my work culture and who I work with and who I associate with as friends. All those things are very, very important to me, and the way that I go about doing my unique contribution, right? Those are all like super important to me. And so there's that. And so essentially like all the other scripts, they don't come from principles. They come from other people. Other people's like agendas, the pressures of circumstances. So, or even like our early life, our training and conditioning, our scripts from earlier years, all these things kind of coalesce to influence our scripting. But we don't have to accept those. We can choose to change those scripts and to re-script ourselves based on principles. Now, the reason that these default scripts surface or even happen in the first place is because of our fundamental vulnerabilities and dependencies. So we have a need as humans to belong, to be accepted, to feel that we matter and we have a sense of importance and worth. And so a lot of times we'll default to these scripts and other people's agendas in order to satisfy that need of belonging. So that's like why these scripts will rise up. And so Essentially, that's kind of like this whole premise is that whether we're aware of it or not, whether we are in control of it or not, there are two creations to everything in our life. And on the one side, we can either proactively design that and take responsibility, or we live out the second creation of other people's agendas, of circumstances, or like past habits, or like training and conditioning, education, all of that, right? And so understanding, again, who we are, our true nature, is important to understanding the principles of this idea, right? And so we have the four unique human capacities, which are self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will. So this section talks about the first three: self-awareness, imagination, and conscience. And so we can take charge of our own first creations. We can put ourselves in the driver's seat. We can be our own programmer by using our self-awareness to understand that again, we are the creators of our life, of becoming aware of that. And then using imagination to be able to think up and imagine different worlds, different possibilities. And then using our conscience to decide, are those worlds correct? And should we actually pursue them based on our values and based on principles? And will they lead us to a joyful end, right? And so that's kind of this section signed up by design or by default. And so I want to share a quick story, though, about how this like really applies and why it like truly matters to people. Like, why should someone care about this? So I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Peru. Amazing experience. Loved it every second of it. I wish I had known this principle, though, because when I got there, I kind of just like, again, lived out the first creations of other people, of like my trainer, district leader or zone leader, or like my president, or even like circumstances of like members, or I just wasn't very intentional about the things I was doing on my mission. I just kind of like assumed that everything was the way it is and it should just keep going on like that. But I didn't really take time to like re-script myself. And they weren't necessarily bad scripts. They just weren't my scripts. And so like that's what I would have changed. And the mission was a fantastic experience. I learned a lot. It was awesome. But looking back on it, like I do have some like regrets and sorrows. Like I truly do feel that the Lord accepted my offering and that I had acted in accordance with the light and knowledge that I had at that time. But knowing what I know now, I would do it way differently, like completely differently. And I would have been way more effective. Granted, it's kind of the purpose of life, and the purpose of the mission is to grow and to develop these things, right? And so, yeah, I can do it perfect the first time. But if we don't take the time to understand this principle of the first creation, then ultimately what's going to happen to us is we're going to reach the top of the ladder to realize that it's against the wrong wall. And we're going to be filled with that regret and that sorrow. And we're going to like come to a realization that the wall we've climbed, it actually isn't very important to us at all. And it actually led us to somewhere that we don't want to be. And so, but then it's too late, right? And so, but that's why this is so important to people, because if you don't take the time to really think through like your morning routine or your day, or even like your unique contribution, your 5-year vision, 10-year vision, your end of life vision, your eulogy, like, no, like nothing else really matters. It doesn't really have any meaning to it. Like this beginning with the end in mind gives everything we do context and meaning. It provides it with like this joy and this excitement to live day by day, where every day is full of like passion and joy and light and truth, and we're not stuck in this reactive victim mindset of blaming other circumstances. Rather, we just take control of our lives and begin with the end in mind. So guys, that's like why it's super important. And so how I'm going to implement this is I am going to, which I kind of already did with the podcast, but that's in the past. I want to create something in the future now. So what I want to do is create more in-depth first creation of my scripture studies, and how I'm going to be in optimal state to where my mind is enlightened and the word becomes delicious unto me. So I'm going to design a perfect scripture study and what that feels like and looks like, the time I'm going to be there, what I'm going to study, what the answers I'm going to receive, the questions I want to answer, the spirit that I'll feel, and to set objectives for that and to accomplish those objectives as I go about doing that. As far as that, I commit that I will do that. And appreciate you guys being honest. This stuff is amazing, and please share it with other people. Have a great day.